You ever backed the wrong horse? I have. We all have, if you really think about it. Hell, if you're subbed, you're probably doing it right now. Oh, you. The Panasonic 3DO Interactive Multiplayer. Friends call you the 3DO, but everyone calls you a mess. Released in 1993, the 3DO was really ahead of its time, offering bleeding-edge graphics and offered a way for you to play your CDs, video CDs, photo CDs, surround sounds, karaoke discs, all the while boasting incredibly impressive specs for a home console at the time, like 1 megabyte of dedicated VRAM, 2 megabytes system RAM, a 12.5 megahertz processor. This was actually honestly pretty close to trading blows with PCs commonly on sale at the time. While a computer might have been more useful, seeing stuff like this on a home console in 1993 was really something to get pretty excited about. The SNES by comparison looked ancient on paper, weaker specs, older storage tech, and while the Sega Genesis was capable of playing CDs with an add-on, it lacked the raw firepower to really take full advantage of playing video unless you wanted to look like mud. And the Sega CD would frequently see hardware problems. And if you're looking at it just from that direction, it's almost a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you buy yourself a 3DO instead of the alternatives if you're in the market for a system in 1993? It was $699. $699. That's the magic number. Your admission fee to Panasonic's future. With inflation today, that's almost $1,283 for a home console. And this is where it all hit the fan pretty quick. Sure, the Genesis and SNES were far weaker systems, but both kinda knew how to stay in their lane, oh my god. You see, for $89.99 in 1993, you could have yourself either a Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo. You're just under $50 if you want an NES. My, how things have changed. And if you absolutely needed a CD player glued to your game console, hell, you can get yourself a Sega Genesis with a Sega CD for under $250. Actually, a pretty good deal, all things considered. It would be another year or two before CD players on their own were regularly hitting where it just made more sense to get one on its own. And you see, these prices, they make more sense. In 1993, video game consoles were still very much considered toys by most people. And really, most families weren't willing to shell out that much money when for just a bit more, you could just buy a basic family computer from some shady guy in a Radio Shack that they said will last forever. And that's the moment that the 3DO failed, right out the gate. It just didn't make sense financially, and it was just way too ahead of itself. But bless their little hearts, they kept trying to make it a thing, securing deals with other companies to create their own versions of the console that sadly would never see the light of day, trying to cut the price to where they were taking a loss on every unit, and attempting to get consumers to see their console of the future. But really, more than anything, Panasonic needed a killer app. Sega had Sonic, Nintendo had Mario, Atari had this spinning head thing. And the 3DO would have the coolest, most radical mascot of them all. And then they got Gex instead. That's right, I'm talking about him again, yeah! Gex's debut game would start development in 1993 and was pretty much immediately riddled with issues. The 3DO was harder to develop for than previous consoles they had worked on. It was only a 4-man team in a strange, uncharted land, and very quickly this little team would have to start making concessions in order to attempt to meet its April 1994 launch window. Going from the game being called Gecko X, a game where you're a stunt gecko going to different worlds, each using stock video footage to match the theme of what world you're visiting, to being the wisecracking, TV-addicted, rude dumbass we know and love. There he is. These setbacks and Panasonic not really wanting to give Crystal Dynamics the money to hire more people on led to pretty massive setbacks and issues. Levels would take around 2 months to complete with issues abound, with the cheapest people money could buy being brought onto the project only to make totally unusable levels, as well as the cheapest artists money could buy, leading to some totally unusable assets, eating both precious time and money. The team was extremely overworked, with additional people coming in to work on the game in secret, utilizing some otherwise unused sci-fi assets to create extra levels just to try and add something more to the rapidly shrinking game. On top of it, one of the head developers would end up being fired after a level he worked on was edited without his permission, leading to him attempting to quite literally dox the head of product development through hiding the original version of the level with a text box, telling everyone who happened to find it in the level select to give her a piece of your mind and my mind too. Classy. In the end, the game would only see 28 of the levels planned actually make it into the final release. And and it can be presumed from the level select alone that over 80 levels had actually been planned at some point. But honestly, I'm just taking guesses here. There could have been more, there could have been less. The overworked, overstressed team left the project pissed off and upset with the final product, and by the time it launched in March of 1995, the 3DO was already pretty old news. PlayStation and the Sega Saturn were on the horizon. The console had gained a bad reputation internationally, with it primarily being used for porn in Japan, and the overall quality of the games in North America damaging its reputation beyond repair. And even with extreme price cuts, with Panasonic and Gold Star eating $100 on every 3DO sold towards the end, the console would end up being discontinued by the end of 1996, selling around 2 million units, meaning, well, it did beat a Nintendo console. Just the wrong one. With that said, Gex would end up being the best-selling game for the 3DO, being purchased by half of the entire install base for the console it debuted on before jumping ship and being ported to the Sega Saturn, PlayStation, and PC, though with some minor changes. The 3DO would have a save feature that the other versions didn't get, why, and only ran at 30 FPS compared to the other version's 60, but ran at a higher resolution to the other home console counterparts. But for the sake of this video, I'm mostly going to be looking at the recent GOG release of the game, which I'm pretty happy to learn exists, actually. Makes you feel like you're still here. Backstory time! Deep in a valley on Maui lived a gecko family that was just trying to make ends meet. Mom had her paws full, raising 3.5 kids, while Dad was away doing research for NASA. Gex, the oldest offspring, was a bright lad who would spend his day with his friends, surfing, playing the ukulele, and throwing poi parties down on the beach with the local lady lizards. That all changed though, the day his mother got a call from NASA telling her that the rocket containing Dad and 10 other volunteers, chosen to see if they could eat tapioca pudding in zero gravity, had exploded on the launch pad due to a band-aid floating in one of the fuel tanks. While the rest of the family dealt with their grief in the usual manner, Gex bottled up his feelings, taking refuge in front of the only thing in the house that had always provided him undemanding comfort. The TV. The TV would provide Gex comfort in his time of need, and he would become cripplingly addicted to watching it, to the point of having delusions that they were his true friends, that they would always be there for him, and in turn, he would always be there for them. Shortly thereafter, his family would relocate to California, and shortly after that, Gex's TV addiction would grow too much for his mother, who gave it away to some gypsies. After this, a broken Gex would trot off into a multi-month bender, spending his time living in a friend's garage, skateboarding, doing favors for frustrated housewives for cash. Wait, hold up. Yeah, no, that's what the manual says. One day while skateboarding, talking to an invisible friend, his mother rolled up in a limo and informed Gex that they had hit the big time. His uncle passed away, but in the process left almost $20 billion in stocks behind, which they would split between the family. They bought Australia. His mother bought NASA and fired everyone, turning it into a Space Monkey-themed restaurant. Damn, Gex was really ahead of its time. And Gex would use his portion to achieve his new dream, buying a giant TV and the largest piece of property in his old hometown, sealing himself inside with enough food to last a lifetime, and spending the rest of his days doing nothing but watch TV. Spend the rest of his life sealed away with the only people he could trust. About 3 days in, and Gex, like most people trying to subsist entirely on cable TV, ran out of things to watch, and while flipping through the channels would mindlessly eat a bugged fly. Rez, possible father of the year 1995-2000, had laced Gex's snack, and with it allowed him to pull Gex through the TV. His only escape being destroying the TVs and demons he holds so dear. Oh, that was fucking dark. Now, tragic backstory aside, Gex is a pretty simple game. You have 5 worlds to go to, each themed after a genre of movie or TV show. This time around we have a horror world, a cartoon world, kung fu theater, jungle, Rhizopolis looking as funky as ever, and a sci-fi bonus world awarded to you for completing all the bonus missions found throughout levels. Each world has a handful of missions to complete, each tasking you with finding a remote, while navigating some platforming challenges and trying to collect fly coins to work towards extra lives. Some levels also have these VHS tapes to collect, which will give you passwords to work with, and it's the closest thing you get to saving in this game, so buckle up, Buttercup. You better get good at finding these, or make sure you finish a boss fight before you close the game, or you're starting from square one. You'll also come across these cameras, which will act as your checkpoints. Should you bite it, you'll come back here as long as you still have some lives to work with. These levels are alright, though I do think this game suffers from a bit of Sonic 1-itis. If you played this game, you probably remember the first level, and you might have played the second, but I seriously don't ever remember going any farther than that despite my starting the game more than once in the past. They're just sort of there. And the visuals aren't really knocking out of the park, even if Gex does have this weird DKC thing going on with his own sprites. Maybe he's 3D because he's the only real one. As you go on, the levels almost run into an issue where they feel like they're almost designed without knowing how Gex would handle, leading to some pretty iffy platforming moments and some levels being way too maze-like for my liking. Especially considering you need to be finding those remotes at a minimum to beat the game. I almost feel like it would have benefited pretty heavily from just having you try to get to the end with a bit of exploration for goodies rather than getting lost and hoping you find the right way. The bosses are also pretty disappointing. They run in a pretty limited, very set pattern, and it never really feels like you're making any progress. It's like running a YouTube channel! Really, the most notable one is Rez, but even this fight is just okay. It's mostly notable for how the camera actually zooms out a lot here instead of normally where it's so zoomed in it causes issues. Music is alright across the board as well. There are some bangers here, and it's actually super interesting to see how some of these songs would have effects sampled in other games in the series, but there's also a few tracks that kind of grate on me a bit. The cartoon world in particular just didn't vibe with me. It kind of left me with this really bad earworm I can't get out of my head. The first level's boss, however, had a pretty good banger, so I guess it kind of evens out. Gex himself is pretty interesting in how he controls, and by that I mean he moves like an asshole. Man, this is rough. It's like I'm controlling an oiled up brick. Go too slow and his momentum works against you. Go too fast and this asshole just goes flying into things. It's actually a little bit hard to describe. If I had to directly compare it to something, it's like a reverse Bubsy if you ever played those games. Gex is just way too heavy and slippery, and it causes a lot of problems the moment you need to do anything in a tight space or need to make some life and death jumps. On the flip side, however, Gex's party trick is actually pretty cool and well executed. Like a gecko, Gex is able to climb on most surfaces, so that includes walls, ceilings, and even some things in the background, which does add some much needed depth to getting around. On top of this, Gex also has access to power-ups in the forms of these little balls. Beat one of these and Gex will either get an extra hit, get a speed boost, gain momentarily invincibility, be able to spit fire, spit ice, which will freeze enemies in place, or spit thunder, which is bar none the best of these, no bias. It's just really good. These will also double as a shield. Get hit with one of these and you lose the power up, but you won't take any real damage. Alternatively, you can just whack these balls for a health boost in a pinch instead, if that's something you're more in dire need of. Sometimes it might be better to guarantee your long-term survival over a timed power up, for example. It's a neat touch once you're aware of it, but a bit frustrating at times when I instinctively whacked away at a ball I really should have been eating. The tail bounce also makes its debut here, but it's really disappointing. Hold down while in midair and you can bounce on enemies or break any smashable ground you happen to be above. Maybe it's because I played the 3D entries first, so I'm just used to bouncing around everywhere like a jackass, but man, this sort of feels weird. Supposedly you can do a super tail bounce by holding jump and after hitting an enemy with it holding up, but I never really got it to work right. It's just a bit too awkward to pull off reliably, in all honesty. It just all kind of piles together for this kind of frustrating experience. It's not really all that enjoyable to play, in all honesty. Overall, Gex's first outing seemed like it wanted to punch above its weight class, and honestly, it has the makings to do so. It was destined to be the mascot for a failing console, and the pressures that console faced definitely ended up negatively impacting its killer app, instead of its killer app saving the system from its imminent demise. It's a very interesting thing to research. It's really a piece of history and a product of its time, and it's so fascinating to discuss and look into. But as a game, it's frustrating. It's hard for the wrong reasons. You can feel the impact of every single development issue this game had. And the worst part is, it's just pretty mediocre. Any worse, I could have a laugh and study what a comical failing led to this game turning out in such a broken state. Any better, I'll likely be going into way more detail about things and saying how much I loved this game and how it would influence its sequels, but it's just meh. And that's really the worst thing a game can be, isn't it? Maybe it's like the Sonic CD of Gex games is a little different than the rest. Strange game in the series that not many people remember. And maybe it's best that it just stays that way. Thank you.
Hey, cool. I wonder what's on HBO.